I'm the waitress who saw through his disguise, and what I wrote left the millionaire speechless. That night, the laughter stopped, but the weight of his arrogance stayed with me long after I left the table. I still remember the sharp sting of his words, like cold steel pressed against my skin. Maybe you're serving tables for people who don't appreciate it, or cleaning up after everyone else has left. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Margaret, but everyone at Murphy's Diner in Brooklyn called me Maggie. At 58, I'd been carrying trays and burdens for more decades than I cared to count. My hands were rough from years of scalding plates and chemical cleaners. My lower back ached every morning before my feet even touched the cold linoleum floor of my studio apartment on Flatbush Avenue. The smell of burnt coffee and grease clung to my uniform like an unwelcome perfume. My sensible black shoes had walked thousands of miles between kitchen and table, absorbing the stories of strangers who never bothered to learn my name. But I kept my chin up. I served with dignity because my mama taught me that honest work deserves respect, even when others don't give it. Every morning at 5:30, I'd catch the B46 bus through the gray Brooklyn dawn. The city was different in those early hours. Quieter, more honest somehow. Street sweepers hummed their lonely songs while delivery trucks rumbled past sleeping brownstones. I'd watch other working people through fogged windows, all of us heading toward jobs that barely paid enough but kept us moving forward. Murphy's Diner sat on the corner of Atlantic and Court Street, wedged between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. It wasn't much to look at. Cracked vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that flickered when it rained, and a coffee machine that wheezed like an old dog. But it was mine in a way. I knew every stain on the counter, every squeak in the floor, every customer's favorite order. The regulars were my family. There was Mr. Romano, who came in every Tuesday for black coffee and a blueberry muffin, always leaving exact change plus $1 tip. Mrs. Chen ordered the same chicken soup when her arthritis flared up. Young Tommy, barely 18, would sit at the counter doing homework while his mother worked double shifts at the hospital. I'd slip him free pie when nobody was looking. But for every kind soul, there were others who treated me like furniture. They'd snap their fingers to get my attention. They'd leave messes on purpose, complaining about service while I cleaned up after their children. Some would pay their $40 tab and leave me 73 cents, not because they couldn't afford more, but because they didn't think I deserved it. I'd been saving every extra penny for 3 years. My son Danny was at community college in Queens, studying to be an electrician. Smart boy, smarter than his old mother ever was. But tuition kept rising, and his part-time job at Home Depot barely covered books. I'd skip lunch most days, making do with coffee and whatever soup was left over from the previous night's dinner special. The apartment I shared with my sister Rose wasn't much. 2 tiny bedrooms, a kitchen with cabinets that wouldn't stay shut, and radiators that clanged like angry ghosts. Rose worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown. We'd pass each other in the hallway sometimes, her heading to bed as I headed to work. 2 women grinding through life, holding each other up without many words. I'd learned not to dream too big. Dreams were dangerous when you lived paycheck to paycheck. But late at night, when my feet were soaking in Epsom salt and Rose was snoring softly in the next room, I'd sometimes imagine having my own place. Nothing fancy. Just a small cafe where I could serve food made with love instead of rushing through orders barked by impatient managers. The night James Grayson walked into Murphy's, I was wiping down table 6 for the 100th time that day. October rain drummed against the windows, and the dinner rush was finally slowing down. My feet screamed inside those black shoes, and my back felt like someone had been using it for hammer practice. He entered with 2 other men in expensive suits, shaking rain from their coats like they were annoyed that weather dared to inconvenience them. I could tell right away they didn't belong here. Their shoes probably cost more than I made in 2 months. Their watches caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like tiny suns. James Grayson was tall, maybe 45, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of tan that came from weekend houses in the Hamptons. His suit was tailored perfectly, hugging his frame like it had been born on his body. When he spoke to his companions, his voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never been turned down for a loan, never counted coins for bus fare. I approached their table with my standard smile. Professional but not too eager, friendly but not presumptuous. It was a smile I'd perfected over decades, one that said I was there to serve, but still human enough to deserve basic courtesy. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, notepad ready. "Can I start you off with some coffee? Maybe take a look at tonight's specials?" James Grayson looked up from his phone, and his eyes swept over me like I was something distasteful he'd stepped in. His gaze lingered on my worn uniform, my practical shoes, my hands that showed every year I'd spent working for a living. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "This place looks like a joke, and yet you're scraping by in that uniform. Do they actually train people here, or do they just throw aprons on anyone desperate enough to work for tips?" The words hit me like a slap. Conversations at nearby tables stopped. Silverware clinked against plates in the sudden quiet. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, but I kept my smile in place, even as it trembled at the edges. His companions laughed, not uncomfortable chuckles, but genuine amusement at my humiliation. One of them, younger with slicked-back hair, added fuel to the fire. "James invests millions in restaurant chains," he said, addressing me like I was a child. "He knows quality when he sees it. This place wouldn't survive a week with proper competition." I wanted to disappear. I wanted to drop my notepad and run through the kitchen, past Murphy himself flipping burgers, out the back door into the rain. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and clicked my pen. "Our chef has been cooking for 30 years, I said quietly. "The meatloaf special tonight comes with homemade mashed potatoes and green beans. Coffee's fresh, brewed 20 minutes ago." James leaned back in his seat, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. "You actually believe that matters, don't you? That 30 years of flipping burgers in a dive like this counts as experience?" He turned to his friends. "This is why these people stay poor. They think effort equals success." The word "these people" hung in the air like smoke. I knew what he meant. People like me. Working people. People who cleaned his offices, served his meals, parked his cars. People who were invisible to millionaire investors unless we were directly useful. Something crystallized in that moment. Not anger exactly, but clarity. This man saw my uniform and immediately decided I was less than human. He looked at my workplace and dismissed everyone in it without knowing a single story, a single struggle, a single dream being pursued between these walls. I took their orders with steady hands, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. When I walked back to the kitchen, I felt eyes on me from every corner of the diner. Some looked sympathetic, others embarrassed for me. A few seemed to agree with Grayson's assessment. Murphy himself was at the grill, his white apron stained with decades of honest work. He was a good man, fair with wages when he could afford to be, understanding when I needed time off for Danny's school events. But his face was tight now, angry. "I heard that, asshole," he said, not looking up from the steaks he was flipping. "Want me to throw them out?" I shook my head. "It's fine, Murphy. They're customers. They'll eat and leave." But it wasn't fine. As I refilled coffee cups and took orders from other tables, Grayson's words echoed in my mind. The casual cruelty of his dismissal. The assumption that my work, my life, my dignity meant nothing because I served food instead of investing in stock markets or cryptocurrency exchanges. When I brought their steaks out 20 minutes later, James was in the middle of explaining some business deal to his companions. Something about Bitcoin investments and multi-million-dollar portfolios. The numbers he threw around casually, 50,000 here, 200,000 there, represented lifetimes of work for people like me. He barely glanced up when I set his plate down. But then he cut into the steak, took a bite, and his expression changed. The arrogance faltered for just a moment. "This is," he started, then caught himself. "It's adequate, I suppose." I knew Murphy's cooking. That man could make a cheap cut of meat taste like it came from the finest steakhouse in Manhattan. Grayson was surprised by the quality, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" I asked. He waved me away like I was a mosquito. But as I turned to leave, I heard him ask his friend about the seasoning on the meat, wondering how such a dump could produce decent food. The rest of their meal passed in relative quiet. They talked business, leveraging assets, diversifying investment portfolios, something about a deal in Europe involving euros and international banking. Their world was so far removed from mine that they might as well have been speaking a foreign language. When they finished, I cleared their plates and brought the check. $87 for 3 meals and drinks. James threw down a $100 bill without counting it. "Keep the change," he said, not looking at me. $13 on an $87 check. I'd been tipped worse, but somehow this felt more insulting than nothing at all, like he was doing me some grand favor by leaving the loose bills in his wallet. After they left, the diner felt different. Customers who'd witnessed the scene kept glancing at me with mixtures of pity and discomfort. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, called me over to her booth. "Don't let men like that get under your skin, honey," she said, pressing my hand. "You're worth 10 of him." But her kindness only made the hurt sharper, because while she saw my worth, while my regular customers knew who I really was, the world was full of James Graysons, people who looked at my uniform and saw failure instead of determination, who saw my calloused hands and thought lazy instead of hardworking. That night, riding the bus home through Brooklyn's neon-lit streets, I stared out at the city lights blurring through rain-streaked windows. Each light represented someone's life, someone's dreams, someone's struggles. How many of us were invisible to people like Grayson? How many of us worked multiple jobs just to keep our heads above water while millionaires complained about the service? Rose was awake when I got home, sitting at our tiny kitchen table with a cup of tea and yesterday's newspaper. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Rough night?" she asked. I told her about Grayson, about the humiliation, about the way his laughter had cut through the diner like broken glass. Rose listened without interrupting, her weathered hands wrapped around her mug. "Some people," she said finally, "have money but no soul. You've got soul, Maggie. That's worth more than all his investments combined." But lying in bed that night, staring at water stains on the ceiling, I wondered if soul paid rent, if dignity bought groceries, if self-respect could fund Danny's education. The next few days at Murphy's were harder somehow. Every customer who snapped their fingers reminded me of Grayson. Every small tip felt like another dismissal. Even the kind regulars seemed different, like I was seeing them through a lens of my own shame. Murphy noticed my mood. "You're letting that rich prick get to you," he said during a slow Tuesday afternoon. "He's gone, Maggie. Forget about him." But I couldn't forget, because Grayson represented something larger than one rude customer. He was every person who'd ever treated me like I was less than human because of what I did for a living. Every executive who'd snapped at me for bringing the wrong coffee. Every teenager who'd mocked my uniform. Every person who'd left a mess on their table because it's her job to clean it up. A week after the incident, I was surprised to see a familiar figure walk through Murphy's door. James Grayson, alone this time, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his expensive suit. He looked almost nervous. He sat at the same booth, and I steeled myself to approach him. Maybe he'd come back to apologize. Maybe he'd realized how cruel he'd been. Or maybe he just wanted another good steak. "Coffee?" I asked, holding up the pot. He nodded, and I filled his cup. His hands, I noticed, weren't as smooth as I'd remembered. There were calluses on his palms, old ones like he'd done manual labor at some point in his life. "I wanted to," he started, then stopped. "The food was excellent last week. I was wondering if you could tell me about the chef's technique with that steak. I blinked in surprise. This wasn't what I'd expected. Murphy uses a dry rub with paprika and garlic powder, lets it sit for an hour before cooking, high heat first to sear, then lower to finish. He nodded thoughtfully. And the potatoes? Real potatoes, hand-mashed with butter and cream, no instant mix. For a moment, we were just two people talking about food. Then reality crashed back, and I remembered his cruel words, his dismissive laughter. "Will that be all?" I asked, suddenly formal again. He studied my face, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. "I was out of line last week," he said quietly. "My comments were inappropriate." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was closer than I'd expected. I poured more coffee into his cup and wondered what had brought him back alone, looking humbled instead of arrogant. "Everyone has bad days," I said, "because my mama raised me to be gracious even when people didn't deserve it." He stayed for an hour, eating Murphy's meatloaf and asking questions about the neighborhood, about how long the diner had been open, about the regular customers. When he left, he tipped $30 on a $15 meal and said thank you like he meant it. But his attempt at redemption was too little, too late. Because the next morning, I walked into Murphy's to find my world turned upside down. Cheryl, one of the younger waitresses, was whispering with Murphy by the register. They stopped talking when they saw me, but their expressions said everything. Something was wrong. "Maggie," Murphy said, his voice heavy, "we need to talk." He led me to his small office behind the kitchen, a closet-sized space crammed with invoices, delivery schedules, and a coffee-stained calendar. Murphy closed the door and sat heavily in his desk chair. "There's been a complaint," he said, not meeting my eyes. "A serious one." My stomach dropped. "What kind of complaint?" "Someone called the health department, said they saw you not washing your hands properly, wiping tables with dirty rags. Inspectors coming tomorrow morning." I stared at him. "Murphy, you know that's not true. I'm the most careful person you have about cleanliness." "I know that," he said, looking miserable. "But there's more. An anonymous letter to the owner claimed you were giving away free food, skimming from the register. Said you were unreliable, maybe stealing." The words hit me like physical blows. 30 years of honest work, and someone was trying to destroy my reputation with lies. "Who would do this?" I asked, though I was starting to have a horrible suspicion. Murphy shrugged helplessly. "Could be anyone. Competition from other diners, former employee with a grudge. Hell, could be a customer who didn't like their service. Or it could be a millionaire investor who didn't appreciate being corrected about food preparation by someone he considered beneath him. Someone wealthy enough to have connections, influence, ways of making problems for people who dared to treat him like an equal human being." "Am I fired?" I asked. "Not fired," Murphy said quickly, "but suspended until this gets sorted out. I'm sorry, Maggie. I know you're clean, but I can't risk the whole diner getting shut down because of a health code violation." I understood. Murphy had employees to think about, customers to serve, rent to pay. But understanding didn't make the betrayal hurt less. I cleaned out my locker, an extra apron, a bottle of ibuprofen, a photo of Danny from his high school graduation. Walking out of Murphy's that day felt like leaving my own skin behind. The diner had been my second home for 8 years. Those customers had been my extended family. That job had been my identity, my purpose, my way of contributing something meaningful to the world. Rose found me crying at our kitchen table when she got home from her shift. I told her everything, the complaints, the suspension, the crushing weight of being accused of things I'd never done. "This has that rich man's fingerprints all over it," she said, anger blazing in her tired eyes. "I can't prove that," I said, "and even if I could, what am I supposed to do? He has money, connections, influence. I'm just a waitress who was born on the wrong side of Brooklyn." But Rose was tougher than me, harder from years of night shifts and disappointments. "Maybe," she said, But you're also the woman who raised a son while working 3 jobs, who took care of Mama when she was dying, who's been carrying other people's weight your whole life. Don't let some overgrown bully break you now." The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Without Murphy's steady paycheck, our already tight budget became impossible. Rose picked up extra shifts, but her knees were bad, and the additional work left her exhausted and hurting. I applied at other diners, other restaurants, even fast food places. But word travels fast in the service industry. The health department investigation cleared me. They found no evidence of wrongdoing, no violations in my work history. But the rumor mill had already done its damage. Managers would start interested, then their expressions would change when they checked references. "Sorry," they'd say, "we're looking for someone with a completely clean record." Danny wanted to drop out of school and get a full-time job to help support us. That broke my heart more than anything else. I'd worked myself to the bone to give him opportunities I never had, and now my disgrace was threatening his future. "Absolutely not," I told him. "Your education is the one thing in this world I won't compromise on." But at night, doing math with our dwindling savings, I wondered how long I could keep that promise. 3 months after my suspension from Murphy's, I was walking home from another fruitless job interview when I saw him. James Grayson, coming out of an upscale restaurant on Court Street, laughing with the same friends who'd witnessed my humiliation. He looked exactly the same. Expensive clothes, confident stride, the glow of someone who'd never worried about next month's rent. When he saw me, his laughter died. For a moment, we stared at each other across the widening gap of early evening pedestrians. Then he did something I didn't expect. He walked over. "Margaret," he said, and I was surprised he remembered my name. "How are you?" "Fine," I lied, because admitting the truth would have been too dangerous, too much like begging. But he studied my face with those calculating investor's eyes, and I could tell he saw through the lie, saw the strain, the weight loss from skipping meals, the exhaustion of someone fighting a battle she couldn't win. "I heard about Murphy's," he said quietly. "I'm sorry about what happened." The way he said it, not surprised but sorry, confirmed what I'd suspected all along. He knew because he'd arranged it. Maybe not directly, but his money and connections had reached out like invisible hands to strangle my livelihood. "These things happen," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. We stood there in awkward silence while Brooklyn rushed around us. Finally, Grayson reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "If you're looking for work," he said, "I have investments in several restaurant chains. I could make some calls." I looked at the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, the logo of Grayson Capital Management gleaming like a tiny gold badge. This was supposed to be his olive branch, his way of making things right. But taking his help would mean admitting defeat. It would mean accepting that he had the power to destroy my life and rebuild it according to his whims. It would make me dependent on the man who'd humiliated me, beholden to his charity. I handed the card back. "Thank you, but no." Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Maybe even respect. "Margaret, you don't understand. These positions pay well, have benefits. You could provide for your family." "I've been providing for my family long before I knew you existed," I said, "and I'll keep providing for them long after you've forgotten my name." For the first time since I'd known him, James Grayson looked genuinely ashamed, not embarrassed or caught off guard, but truly sorry for what he'd done. "I want to make this right," he said. "Then leave me alone," I said. "Let me find my own way." I walked away before he could respond, my head high despite everything. Because Rose was right. I'd been carrying weight my whole life. This was just another burden to bear, another challenge to overcome. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with paper and pen, writing a letter I'd been composing in my head for months. Not to Grayson. He'd had enough of my attention. This letter was for me, for every woman who'd ever been dismissed because of her uniform, her zip code, her bank account. I wrote about dignity in the face of cruelty, about the nobility of honest work, whether you're serving coffee or managing millions in Bitcoin investments, about the difference between having wealth and having worth. I wrote about the invisible army of women keeping the world running, cleaning offices, serving meals, caring for children and elderly parents, holding families together with determination and love. Women whose names nobody remembers, but whose hands touch everything that matters. I wrote until my fingers cramped and dawn light crept through our kitchen window. When I finished, I had 12 pages of everything I'd never been allowed to say. Every frustration, every moment of beauty in the work others dismissed, every truth about the value of a life spent in service to others. The next day, I walked those 12 pages to the Brooklyn Daily Tribune, a small local newspaper that sometimes ran human interest stories. The editor, a kind woman named Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, as it turned out, read my letter while I waited. "This is powerful," she said when she finished, "but are you sure you want to publish it?" "You mentioned Grayson by name. He has lawyers." "Let him sue me," I said. "I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain by telling the truth." The article ran the following Tuesday under the headline, "The Invisible Woman's Reply. A Waitress Responds to Wall Street Arrogance." Sarah had edited lightly, preserving my voice while tightening the prose, but it was my letter, my words, my truth finally given form. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters poured into the Tribune's office, phone calls, emails, other service workers sharing their own stories of being dismissed, humiliated, treated as less than human by people who'd never worked an honest day in their lives. Local news stations picked up the story. A reporter from Channel 7 interviewed me in front of Murphy's Diner, asking about the dignity of work and the epidemic of treating service employees like servants instead of human beings. But the most surprising response came from James Grayson himself. He called me 3 days after the article was published. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unfamiliar number, but something made me pick up. "Margaret." His voice was different over the phone. Smaller, somehow, less commanding. "I read your letter." I waited, saying nothing. "You're right," he said simply. "About everything. About me. About how I treated you. About the kind of person I'd become." "What do you want, Mr. Grayson?" "To apologize. Really apologize. Not just try to manage the damage to my reputation." He paused. "And to tell you something you deserve to know." A week later, we met at a small cafe near Prospect Park. Not Murphy's. That would have been too loaded with history. This was neutral ground, a place where we could speak as equals instead of customer and waitress. Grayson looked older than he had just months before. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been wisdom or might have been exhaustion. "I grew up 3 blocks from where you live now," he said without preamble. "My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in Brooklyn Heights." I studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. "When I made my first million in tech investments, I swore I'd never be poor again. Never be looked down on, never be dismissed." He smiled bitterly. "Somewhere along the way, I became the person I'd once hated. I started looking down on people like my parents. People like you. That doesn't excuse what you did," I said. "No, it doesn't." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine. "I destroyed your reputation because you reminded me of everything I'd tried to leave behind. Your dignity, your pride in honest work. It made me ashamed of what I'd become." The confession hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. "I can't undo what I did," he continued, "but I can tell you the truth. The complaints against you, the health department visit, that was me. I used my connections to make your life miserable because you dared to treat me like an equal human being." Hearing him admit it should have felt like victory. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of carrying anger, tired of being the victim in someone else's story of redemption. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because your letter changed something in me. made me remember who I used to be before the money and success turned me into someone I wouldn't have liked when I was young and hungry. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick and official-looking. "This is a cashier's check for $50,000. It's not charity. It's restitution for the income you lost because of my actions." I stared at the envelope without touching it. $50,000. More money than I'd see in 2 years of serving coffee and clearing tables. Enough to pay off our debts, help Danny finish school, maybe even start over somewhere else. "I don't want your guilt money," I said. "It's not guilt money. It's justice. You earned every penny of this through the suffering I caused you." He sat back. "But there's something else. I've been working with a group of investors to open a new restaurant in Dumbo. High-end comfort food, the kind of place that celebrates the dishes you grew up with instead of looking down on them." I waited for the catch. "We need someone to run it. Not as a manager reporting to corporate suits, but as an owner-operator. Someone who understands food, understands service, understands what it means to work for every dollar." The words hung in the air between us. A restaurant. My own place. Everything I dreamed about during those late nights soaking my feet and counting tips. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're the best waitress I've ever encountered. Because you know food in a way that can't be taught in culinary school. Because you understand that hospitality isn't about profit margins. It's about making people feel welcome, valued, human." He slid another envelope across the table. "Business plan, financial projections, list of potential investors. All you have to do is say yes, and you'll own 40% of everything. Full creative control over menu, staffing, operations." I looked at the envelopes, one containing money, the other containing possibility. Both represented paths I'd never imagined walking. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course." He stood to leave, then paused. "Margaret? Your letter didn't just change me. It's changing how a lot of people think about service work, about dignity, about seeing past someone's uniform to who they really are. That's worth more than any investment return I've ever generated." That night, I showed Rose the envelopes. We sat at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd written my letter, where I'd cried after losing my job, where we'd counted pennies and made impossible budgets work through sheer determination. $50,000, Rose whispered, touching the check like it might disappear. "Maggie, this could change everything." "He destroyed my life to make himself feel better," I said. "Now he wants to rebuild it to make himself feel better. Either way, it's about him, not me." "Maybe," Rose said slowly, "or maybe sometimes the universe uses broken people to deliver the blessings we've been waiting for." She wasn't wrong. The money would solve our immediate problems. The restaurant opportunity was everything I dreamed of. But accepting Grayson's offer felt like admitting he had the power to control my destiny. Over the next week, I walked through Brooklyn with new eyes. I paid attention to every diner, every cafe, every place where people gathered to share food and stories. I imagined my own space, not fancy, but warm, not expensive, but excellent. A place where service workers would be treated with respect, where good food didn't require an apology for its simplicity. Danny came home from school that Friday with news that made my decision easier. "Mom," he said, excitement lighting up his face, "you know that internship program with the electrical union? They accepted me. Full scholarship for the advanced training, guaranteed apprenticeship when I graduate." My heart swelled with pride and relief. My son was going to be fine, better than fine. He was going to build the life he deserved through his own intelligence and hard work. "There's just one thing," he added, suddenly serious. "They want me to start this summer. It means I'll be working full-time and can help with expenses while I finish school." That night, I called James Grayson. "I'll take the restaurant deal," I said, "but I have conditions." We met the next day to negotiate, not as millionaire and waitress, but as business partners. I insisted on hiring practices that prioritize treating employees fairly, living wages, health benefits, respect for the people who make restaurants actually function. Done, Grayson said. Anything else? The name stays mine to choose, and if you ever treat any of my employees the way you treated me, the partnership ends immediately. He extended his hand. Deal. Looking back, I'm not sure what surprised me more, that he agreed to my terms or that I had the courage to make them. Opening Maggie's Table took 8 months. 8 months of permits and contractors, menu planning and staff interviews, learning to read profit and loss statements and negotiate with suppliers. Grayson was true to his word. He provided financial backing and business expertise, but left creative decisions to me. The space we found was perfect. A converted warehouse in Dumbo, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan Bridge. Big enough for 60 seats, small enough to maintain the intimate feeling I wanted. I hired with my heart. Sophia, a single mother who'd been washing dishes at chain restaurants despite having trained as a chef in El Salvador. Marcus, a young man aging out of foster care who needed someone to believe in his potential. Linda, a woman my age who'd lost her factory job when the plant closed and was told she was too old to retrain. We weren't just building a restaurant. We were creating a family of people who understood what it meant to work hard, be overlooked, and still show up with dignity every day. The menu reflected everything I'd learned about comfort food during my years in diners and cafes. Macaroni and cheese elevated with Vermont cheddar and panko breadcrumbs. Meatloaf made from a blend of beef, pork, and veal, served with truffle mashed potatoes. Fried chicken that would make your grandmother weep with joy. But we also showcased the cuisines of our employees and neighborhood. Sophia's pupusas, Marcus's grandmother's cornbread recipe, Linda's pierogi made from scratch every morning. The night before we opened, I stood alone in the dining room, looking out at the tables set with simple white plates and mason jar water glasses. The walls displayed photographs of working people from the neighborhood. Bus drivers, teachers, construction workers, other restaurant staff, people whose hands built and sustained everything around us. This was my space, my vision, my chance to prove that dignity and delicious food could coexist without apology. James Grayson came to our soft opening, bringing his wife and teenage daughter. I watched nervously as they studied the menu, wondering if he'd changed his mind about supporting comfort food over molecular gastronomy. His daughter ordered the mac and cheese. His wife chose Sophia's daily special, braised short ribs with plantains. Grayson himself asked for the meatloaf that had surprised him at Murphy's all those months ago. When Sophia brought out their plates, I saw Grayson close his eyes after the first bite, a small smile playing at his lips. "This tastes like home," his wife said. After they finished, Grayson approached me at the coffee station where I was training one of our new servers. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. It was a review from the Times food critic, someone I hadn't even realized had visited during our first week. 5 stars. The headline read, "Maggie's Table, where comfort food meets dignity." The review praised everything, the food, the service, the atmosphere of genuine warmth. But the final paragraph made tears spring to my eyes. In an industry often marked by exploitation and pretension, Maggie's Table represents something increasingly rare, a restaurant that values both its employees and its guests. Owner Margaret Sullivan has created more than a dining establishment. She's built a testament to the nobility of honest work and genuine hospitality. This is food with soul, served by people who understand that a meal is about more than nutrition. It's about community, respect, and the simple human need to be seen and valued. 6 months later, we had a 3-week waiting list for reservations. Food Network wanted to feature us on a show about community restaurants. A cookbook publisher approached me about compiling our recipes with the stories behind them. But the moment that meant the most came on a Tuesday afternoon when Mrs. Chen, from Murphy's, shuffled through our doors, leaning heavily on her walker. "I heard my daughter's friend opened a fancy place," she said, settling carefully into a booth by the window. "Thought I'd see what all the fuss is about." I served her myself, chicken soup with homemade noodles, exactly the way she liked it at Murphy's, but elevated with herbs from our rooftop garden. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. "This is good soup," she said finally. "Tastes like someone who understands that food is love made visible." After she left, I found a note tucked under her coffee cup. "For the best waitress who became the best boss. Some people are born to serve others, not from weakness, but from strength. You found yours." That evening, as I locked up the restaurant and walked through Brooklyn toward home, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the humiliation that broke me open, the letter that became my voice, the partnership that transformed an enemy into an unlikely ally. But mostly, I thought about all the women still out there serving coffee, clearing tables, cleaning offices, caring for other people's children and parents. Women whose worth isn't measured by their bank accounts or investment portfolios, but by their capacity to show up, to care, to keep the world running through their steady, faithful work. They deserve to be seen. They deserve to be valued. They deserve to know that their labor has dignity, their dreams have merit, their voices have power. My story isn't just about one waitress who fought back against disrespect. It's about recognizing that every person serving you, whether in a diner, a department store, a medical office, or your own home, carries stories, dreams, wisdom, and strength that the world needs. The next time you're served by someone in a uniform, I want you to remember something. Look at their hands. They've carried trays, cleaned messes, comforted strangers. Look at their eyes. They've seen more human nature than most therapists, absorbed more pain and joy than most poets. Look at their posture. It tells the story of someone who shows up day after day, making other people's lives a little easier, and then do something revolutionary. See them. Really see them. Not as a function or a service, but as a human being deserving of the same courtesy, respect, and dignity you'd want for yourself or your children. Because here's what I learned during those months in the darkness. You can't break someone who knows their own worth. You can humiliate them, silence them, even destroy their livelihood. But if they carry dignity in their bones and love in their service, they will find a way to rise. The money James Grayson gave me changed my circumstances, but the letter I wrote changed my life. It forced me to articulate what I'd always known but never dared to say, that honest work has honor, that serving others is a calling, that the people who keep society running deserve more than our leftovers and dismissal. Today, Maggie's Table employs 37 people. We pay living wages, provide health insurance, and treat sick days as human rights, not inconveniences. Our staff meetings begin with recognition of excellent service, not just profitable performance. We promote from within, mentor young people, and never, ever allow customers to abuse our employees. It's not perfect. Business never is. Some days are harder than others. Some customers more difficult than we'd prefer. But we've created something rare in the restaurant industry, a workplace where dignity isn't negotiable. James Grayson and I aren't friends exactly, but we've become something more valuable, partners in proving that success and decency can coexist. He's learned to see past uniforms to the people wearing them. I've learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the door to the best thing that could happen. He still invests in Bitcoin and manages multi-million-dollar portfolios, but now he also uses his wealth to support businesses that treat workers fairly, that contribute something meaningful to their communities beyond profit margins. Last month, he brought his daughter to Maggie's Table for her 16th birthday. She's nothing like the arrogant man who once humiliated me. She's polite to servers, curious about where her food comes from, grateful for the work others do to make her life comfortable. She volunteers at a soup kitchen now, he told me as we watched her chatting easily with Marcus about his culinary school plans. says she wants to understand what it means to serve others instead of just being served. Change is possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. Sometimes it takes a crisis to crack someone open enough for light to get in. Sometimes the person who wounds you becomes the catalyst for your greatest transformation. But you can't wait for others to change. You can't build your dignity on someone else's recognition or base your worth on external validation. The power to see yourself clearly, to speak your truth, to demand the respect you deserve. That power lives inside you, waiting to be claimed. The success of Maggie's Table opened doors I never expected. Food industry publications wrote articles about our employee-first model. Business schools invited me to speak about ethical restaurant management. A television production company wanted to create a documentary about service workers who'd overcome adversity to build something meaningful. But the most rewarding development came 2 years after opening, when Sophia approached me with an idea that would expand our mission beyond the walls of our restaurant. "Maggie," she said during our weekly management meeting, "I've been thinking about all the women like us out there, the ones still washing dishes in chain restaurants, still being told they're not qualified for better positions because they don't have formal culinary training." I nodded, remembering my own struggles to find work after the Murphys incident. What if we started a program, a way to train service workers for better positions in the industry? Not just cooking skills, but business management, financial literacy, how to advocate for themselves. The idea excited me immediately. Within 6 months, we'd established the Dignity in Service Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing career advancement opportunities for restaurant workers. We partnered with community colleges to offer evening classes, created apprenticeship programs that paid living wages while teaching essential skills, and developed a network of restaurants committed to hiring from our program. Our first graduating class included 22 women and 3 men, ranging in age from 19 to 57. They'd been dishwashers, bussers, food runners, the invisible backbone of the restaurant industry. 6 months later, 12 had been promoted to management positions, 8 had opened their own food businesses, and 5 were pursuing culinary degrees with our scholarship support. At the graduation ceremony, held in Maggie's Table on a Sunday evening when we were closed to regular service, I watched these hardworking people receive certificates that represented more than education. They represented recognition, possibility, and the radical idea that everyone deserves a chance to grow beyond their circumstances. Maria, a 43-year-old mother of 3 who'd been cleaning restaurant kitchens for 15 years, stood at the podium to address her classmates. Her English still carried the musical accent of her native Guatemala, but her words rang clear and strong. For too long, people looked at me and saw only what I was, a woman who cleaned floors, who took out trash, who was invisible unless something needed to be scrubbed. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. But Maggie taught me that dignity isn't about what you do. It's about how you do it. And more importantly, it's about demanding that others see your worth. She turned to look at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Next month, I start as assistant manager at a restaurant in Queens. My children will see their mother not as someone who serves others, but as someone who leads. That changes everything for my family." After the ceremony, as I helped clean up the empty wine glasses and folded chairs, James Grayson approached me. He'd been quietly funding much of our foundation work, though he insisted on remaining anonymous in all public materials. "You know," he said, loosening his tie, "when I first met you, I thought success was about accumulating wealth and power over others. I measured my worth by how much I could control, how many people I could influence with my money." He picked up a stack of graduation programs, each one bearing a photo and bio of our graduates. These people are going to change their families' futures. Their children will grow up believing they deserve respect, opportunity, education. That's a ripple effect that will touch thousands of lives across generations. I understood what he was trying to say. The foundation wasn't just helping individual workers. It was challenging the entire system that treated service employees as disposable, replaceable, unworthy of investment or advancement. "We're just getting started," I said. "Next year, we want to expand to healthcare workers, home care aides, cleaning staff, every industry where people are essential but invisible." "Whatever you need," he said simply. "This is the best return on investment I've ever made." But the foundation was only one way our story continued to ripple outward. The article I'd written for the Brooklyn Daily Tribune had been reprinted in newspapers across the country. Service workers from Seattle to Miami wrote to tell me their own stories of disrespect, discrimination, and the daily battle to maintain dignity in jobs that society deemed unimportant. I started a blog called Invisible No More, where I shared these stories alongside practical advice for navigating workplace challenges, negotiating for better treatment, and building self-advocacy skills. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, we had over 50,000 regular readers and a community of service workers supporting each other across geographic and industry lines. The blog caught the attention of labor organizers, who invited me to speak at conferences about the emotional and psychological toll of being treated as less than human in the workplace. I learned about wage theft, unsafe working conditions, sexual harassment, and dozens of other issues that affected the people who kept America's economy running. But I also learned about resilience, about women who worked 2 jobs to put themselves through nursing school, about men who saved every penny to start their own landscaping businesses, about immigrants who cleaned offices at night and attended English classes during the day, building better futures for their children one small step at a time. These stories reminded me why my confrontation with James Grayson had mattered so much. It wasn't just about one rude customer or one humiliating evening. It was about a culture that had taught people to look down on honest work, to treat service as servitude, to believe that economic inequality justified moral superiority. 3 years after Maggie's Table opened, I received an invitation that surprised me. The White House wanted me to participate in a roundtable discussion about worker dignity and economic opportunity. The event would bring together labor leaders, business owners, and policy experts to discuss how to create more pathways to economic mobility for service workers. Flying to Washington felt surreal. 3 years earlier, I'd been a suspended waitress facing eviction and wondering how to afford my son's education. Now I was boarding a plane to advise government officials about policies that could affect millions of workers like my former self. The roundtable was held in the Roosevelt Room, a space heavy with history and power. I sat between a union president and a tech CEO, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. When my turn came to speak, I thought about all the women still out there carrying trays, changing bed sheets, answering phones for bosses who barely acknowledged their existence. "Policy matters," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Living wages, healthcare access, paid sick leave. These are essential supports that can mean the difference between survival and stability for working families. I paused, looking around the table at faces representing various perspectives on American economic policy. But policy alone won't solve the problem. We need a cultural shift in how we value work and workers. When a millionaire investor can humiliate a waitress in front of a room full of people and everyone just watches in silence, that tells us something about our collective values. I told them about the foundation, about the graduates who were changing their families' trajectories, about the businesses that had committed to treating all employees with dignity regardless of their position on the organizational chart. The solution isn't charity, I concluded, it's justice. It's recognizing that the woman who cleans your office, the man who serves your coffee, the person who stocks your grocery shelves, they're not stepping stones to your comfort. They're human beings with dreams, intelligence, and contributions that our society desperately needs. After the roundtable, several participants approached me with interest in supporting our foundation work. A major corporation offered to fund a national expansion of our training programs. A philanthropist wanted to endow scholarships for service workers pursuing higher education. But the conversation that stayed with me came from an unexpected source, the tech CEO who'd sat next to me during the discussion. "I built my company from nothing," he said as we waited for our cars outside the White House. "Started in my garage, worked 18-hour days, nearly lost everything twice before we succeeded." I nodded, wondering where this was leading. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that other people were still in their garages, still working those 18-hour days, still struggling to survive while I complained about the quality of service at expensive restaurants. His voice carried the weight of recognition, similar to what I'd heard from James Grayson during our reconciliation meeting. "Your story made me look at how we treat the people who clean our offices, who serve food in our cafeteria, who park cars at company events. We're changing our practices, not because it's good PR, but because it's right." These conversations reminded me that change was possible on multiple levels. Individual transformation like James Grayson's could inspire policy changes, business reforms, and cultural shifts that affected thousands of workers' lives. But the most important changes often happened in small moments between individuals who chose to see each other's humanity despite the roles that society assigned them. 6 months after the White House roundtable, I was working late at Maggie's table, reviewing applications for our next foundation cohort, when a familiar face appeared at our kitchen door. Murphy stood there holding a worn baseball cap, looking older than I remembered, but with the same kind eyes that had seen me through so many difficult shifts 8 years earlier. "Maggie," he said simply, "I owed you a visit." I hugged him fiercely, remembering all the times he'd covered for me when Danny was sick. All the free meals he'd allowed me to give struggling customers, all the quiet ways he'd shown respect for his employees in an industry that often treated them as expendable. "How's the old place?" I asked, pouring him coffee from the batch we kept brewing for staff. "Different without you," he admitted. "Never found another waitress who cared about the customers the way you did. Never found someone who could remember every regular's order, every food allergy, every personal detail that made them feel like family." We sat at the counter where I'd trained so many new servers, looking out at the dining room where we'd created something special. Not just a business, but a community where people's worth wasn't determined by their bank account or social status. "I read about everything you've built here," Murphy continued. "The foundation, the national recognition, all of it. I'm proud of you, Maggie, but I'm not surprised. You always had something special, a way of making people feel seen, valued, important." His words touched something deep inside me, a part that still remembered the frightened woman who'd walked out of his diner 4 years earlier, carrying only her dignity and a fierce determination not to let circumstances break her spirit. "You gave me my start," I said. "You taught me that how you treat people matters more than the food you serve, the profits you make, or the recognition you receive." "No," Murphy said, shaking his head. "You already knew that when you walked into my place 8 years ago. I just gave you a space to practice it." Before he left, Murphy handed me an envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the original article about my confrontation with James Grayson, yellowed now with age, alongside a note in his careful handwriting. "Margaret, your courage to speak truth to power changed how I think about my business, my employees, and my responsibilities as someone who provides work for others. The day you got suspended was the day I learned that good people sometimes pay a price for standing up to bullies. But the day you opened this restaurant was the day I learned that good people also rise higher than their oppressors ever imagined possible. Thank you for the lesson in dignity, Murphy." As I watched him walk away into the Brooklyn evening, I thought about the unexpected ways that trauma and triumph were connected in our lives. My worst day at Murphy's Diner had led directly to my best days at Maggie's table. The humiliation that nearly broke me had also broken me open to possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. But the real victory wasn't the restaurant, the foundation, or the national recognition. It was the thousands of people, employees, customers, program graduates, blog readers, who'd been touched by a simple message: your work has dignity, your dreams have value, and you deserve to be treated with respect regardless of what job you perform or how much money you earn. That weekend, Danny came home from his electrical apprenticeship with news that made my heart swell with pride and gratitude. "Mom," he said, settling into his favorite chair at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd once counted pennies and hoped for something better. "I got the promotion. Lead electrician on the new hospital project downtown. It's a 2-year contract, full benefits, and enough money that Rose can finally cut back her hours if she wants." Looking at my son, confident, skilled, building the life he'd dreamed of through hard work and intelligence, I marveled at how far we'd all come. The scared young man who'd wanted to drop out of school to help support us had become a leader in his field. Rose, now 62, had health insurance through my restaurant and could finally prioritize rest over endless night shifts cleaning office buildings. We were still the same people who'd crowded around this table during our darkest moments, but we'd been transformed by the simple act of refusing to accept that circumstances defined our worth. "There's something else," Danny added, pulling out his phone to show me a photo. "Remember Tommy from Murphy's? The kid who used to do homework at the counter while his mom worked double shifts?" I nodded, remembering the shy teenager I'd slipped free pie when no one was looking. "He's graduating from nursing school next month. Got a job at the children's hospital where his mom works now. Says he wants to invite you to the graduation ceremony because you believed in him when he didn't believe in himself." These connections, the threads that wove through our lives and bound us together in ways we didn't always recognize, reminded me why the work we'd built at Maggie's table and the Dignity and Service Foundation mattered so much. We weren't just changing individual circumstances, we were strengthening the fabric of community that helped everyone rise together. That evening, I walked through our neighborhood with new appreciation for the invisible network of care that surrounded us all. In the bodega on the corner, Maria from our first foundation cohort was working behind the counter, saving money to open her own catering business. At the bus stop, I recognized Janet, one of our current training program participants, heading to her evening job cleaning offices while studying restaurant management during the day. Each of these women carried stories of struggle and dreams of something better. Each had been dismissed, underestimated, or overlooked by people who saw their uniforms but missed their potential. And each was proving that transformation was possible when someone took the time to see their worth and invest in their growth. As I reached Prospect Park, where families gathered for evening picnics and children played on equipment maintained by workers whose names no one knew, I thought about the letter that had started everything, 12 pages of frustration, truth, and hope that I'd written in desperation and published in defiance. That letter had become a bridge, connecting me to thousands of other service workers who'd felt invisible, helping James Grayson remember his own humanity, inspiring policy discussions in Washington, D.C., and creating opportunities for people who'd been told they weren't worth investing in. But most importantly, it had taught me that our voices have power even when the world tries to silence them. That dignity isn't something others bestow upon us. It's something we carry within ourselves and refuse to surrender, no matter how others treat us. The boy playing baseball in the park might grow up to be a millionaire investor. The woman pushing her daughter on the swings might spend her life cleaning houses for wealthy families. The teenager walking his dog might become a famous chef or remain a dishwasher for decades. But none of that determines their worth as human beings. None of that justifies treating anyone as less than deserving of respect, courtesy, and basic human decency. The sun was setting behind the Manhattan skyline by the time I headed home, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded me why Brooklyn had always felt like home. This was where I'd learned to work, to struggle, to persevere, and ultimately to triumph, not by changing who I was, but by refusing to let others define who I could become. Tomorrow, I'd wake up early and head to Maggie's table, where Sophia would be preparing her famous churros for the weekend brunch crowd, and Marcus would be training 2 new line cooks who'd graduated from our foundation program. I'd review applications for our next scholarship recipients and approve the final details for our expansion into Philadelphia, where service workers had been asking for training programs like ours. But tonight, I sat at my kitchen table with Rose, sharing tea and stories like we had through all our years of struggle and triumph. My sister looked tired but content, no longer carrying the weight of supporting us both on her cleaning wages. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she asked. Wrapping her weathered hands around her favorite mug, I waited, thinking she might mention the restaurant's success, the foundation's impact, or the financial security we'd finally achieved. "That you never let that man break you," she said simply. "That you took all that pain he caused and turned it into something beautiful that helps other people. That takes a special kind of strength, Maggie, the kind Mama would have been proud of." As we prepared for bed, I thought about all the women like us. Service workers, caregivers, the invisible army keeping society functioning, who face choices every day between bitterness and hope, between accepting mistreatment and demanding better, between hiding their light and letting it shine despite those who tried to dim it. My story had ended with victory. But I knew that wasn't always how these confrontations resolved. Some women lost their jobs and never recovered. Some couldn't find the words to articulate their worth. Some didn't have the support system that had sustained me through the darkest moments. But every time someone chose dignity over defeat, every time a worker spoke up against mistreatment, every time a customer chose to see the person behind the uniform, we moved a little closer to the world we deserved. One where honest work was honored, where service was respected, and where no one's humanity was ever considered negotiable. The last thing I did before turning off my light was check the Invisible No More blog, where messages from service workers around the world reminded me daily that our struggle for dignity and respect continued in restaurants, hotels, offices, and homes everywhere. Tonight's messages included a photo from a hotel housekeeper in Seattle who'd been promoted to head of housekeeping after completing our online training program, a thank you note from a food server in Detroit whose manager had implemented new policies protecting workers from abusive customers, and an update from a home health aide in Phoenix who'd used our resources to negotiate better working conditions for herself and her colleagues. Each message represented someone who'd refused to remain invisible, who'd found the courage to demand the respect they deserved, who'd discovered that their work had dignity and their voice had power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand our impact, new stories of transformation that proved change was possible when people chose to see each other's humanity instead of their circumstances. But tonight, I fell asleep, grateful for the journey that had brought me here, proud of the community we'd built, and hopeful for all the women still out there serving with dignity, waiting for their moment to shine. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you served others, whether at work, at home, or in your community, only to have your contributions dismissed or taken for granted? Have you worn a uniform, literal or metaphorical, that made people see you as less than human? Tell me in the comments. Share your story, your moment of standing up, your own letter that changed everything. Because your voice matters. Your experience has value. Your dignity is not negotiable. If this story touched something in you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Not for me, but for all the women still serving in silence, still believing they don't deserve better, still waiting for permission to claim their own worth, And for more stories that celebrate the strength found in struggle, the wisdom born of hard work, and the transformation possible when we refuse to accept less than we deserve, click on the podcast link to your left. We've prepared a collection of voices that will remind you are seen, you are valued, and your story matters. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Until next time, remember, the world needs your service, your heart, your unbreakable spirit. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next story.